This is the story of April and Michael, a married couple with 3 children, a loving family, devoted friends, and a typical enemy. An enemy that will tear apart this strong, ideal family, force the husband against the wife, and the father against the son. This story will end in chaos, violence, and murder, leaving only one question unanswered. Who are we facing? A fortunate murderer or an innocent victim? April was born on December 1978. The girl endured a difficult childhood. Her parents abused alcohol and illegal substances. Sometimes her mother could disappear for weeks, leaving April and her 2 younger twin brothers, Chris and Michael, behind. April did everything possible to take care of her younger brothers, changing their diapers and feeding them, even though she was still a child herself. Soon, the grandparents couldn't cope and took the children under their care. They genuinely loved the children and took good care of them. But being elderly, they struggled with the 3 lively kids. Therefore, they had to turn to the state's Child Association for help. They placed the boys in the Owen foster family, while April stayed with her grandparents. The boys regularly visited their grandmother, grandfather, and sister. But at the age of 9, April moved in with her brothers to keep the bond between them strong. The Owen family lived in the town of Eclectic, Alabama, where the girl blossomed. At the age of 17, she met the love of her life, Jesse Michael Holton, whom everyone called Mike. The young couple attended the same school, shared a passion for music, and quickly became friends. Everyone described them as a beautiful couple, so it came as no surprise when, at the age of 19, April became Mrs. Michael Holton. A year after their marriage, they welcomed their first son, and 2 years later, they had 3 children, Madison, Hayden, and Kyle. The dependence on her parents had shattered April's childhood, and she had always dreamed of a stable family life. In Michael, she found someone who fully shared her dreams. April took care of the children while Michael provided for the family by working as a firefighter. On September 11, 2001, he volunteered to go to New York to help people after the explosions. In 2003, at just 25 years old, Michael became the chief of the fire department, the youngest in the city's history. He also underwent training to work as a paramedic. In his spare time, Michael coached school football and baseball teams, while April never missed any of her son's competitions. Overall, the couple actively participated in the life of the town, which made them well known and loved by all. Everything was going well, but one night in 2004, something seemingly insignificant changed their entire happy family life. During a shift, Michael injured his back. In the following weeks, his condition worsened. The doctor prescribed painkillers, but warned him that the pain would only subside if he gave his back the necessary rest. However, as a paramedic, Michael couldn't afford to do so. He continued to work tirelessly, taking medication, and as often happens, became dependent on painkillers. In 2010, the mayor of Eclectic resigned, and Michael had an idea. He believed he could contribute more to the city from an office position, especially as it wouldn't require as much physical exertion. In 2012, at the age of 33, Michael Holton became the mayor. However, a year later, he began to suffer from an unknown illness, manifesting in epileptic seizures. Fortunately, the seizures soon subsided, unlike April's concerns. She suspected that the seizures might be a result of Michael overdosing on painkillers. Furthermore, she knew that Michael's back no longer hurt, and the doctor had stopped prescribing him medication. This meant he was obtaining them illegally. Unfortunately, the problem not only affected Michael's physical health, but also his mood swings. April tried not to complain about the family problems, but her brothers noticed that Michael began to treat her differently, less gently than before. He became verbally abusive and controlling, a completely different person. Moreover, Michael's addiction affected the family's finances. In 2014, they lost their home, yet Michael continued to borrow money from his mother and spend it on pills. April feared they would lose their medical insurance if he got caught and arrested. She demanded that her husband resign as mayor. He complied and returned to work as a paramedic at the fire department. Despite the difficulties, April tried to support her husband. She knew the troubles associated with substance abuse and didn't want her family to face the same difficulties she experienced as a child. She still believed that Michael could overcome his addiction. But then another problem hit the family. The parents found out that their eldest son, 16-year-old Madison, had gotten involved with a group of kids who used cannabis. While April was extremely upset and asked her brother Chris to talk to Madison, Michael saw no point in punishing the boy. He told his wife that it wasn't such a big problem because many teenagers dabbled in marijuana. Hearing this, April realized that she could no longer help her husband, but she could still protect their children from addiction. By April 2016, she and her sons had moved to a new home in a neighboring town, a 20-minute drive from Eclectic. By August, she had filed for divorce. The children split their time between the two families, spending time with both their father and mother. Michael struggled greatly with the separation. He confided in April's best friend and admitted that he feared his wife would start dating someone else. However, she assured him that April just wanted to focus on raising the children and was doing everything in their best interest. At the same time, April warned her son that if he didn't give up his harmful habit, he would no longer live in her house. But within a week, he disobeyed, and his mother sent him to live with his father. Michael convinced April that he agreed with her about Madison, and he was not okay with his son using cannabis. April sincerely believed that in Michael's house, their son should adhere to the same strict rules as in hers. But in reality, things were quite different. Michael's painkiller supply ran out, and he had to take an unexpected step. He asked his son if he could get them for him, and the boy replied that he could. Thus, father and son found themselves bound by a dark secret that they hoped would never come to light. On September 11, 2016, April answered a call from Madison's friend's mother. The woman informed her that the previous night, the 17-year-old boy had hosted a party at his father's house. She was extremely displeased that her son had come home at least partially intoxicated. Upset, April drove home to Mike's to address the situation. While she was en route, she also called Mike. Mike worked shifts, and he hadn't been home all night, so he knew nothing about what had happened. When he arrived home, the house was turned upside down after the teenage party, with traces of alcohol and more. The angry father sent his son a message to come home immediately. When April entered Mike's house, she found her son sitting on the couch with his hands handcuffed behind his back. This was Mike's decision to punish him for disobedience. Mike had already called the police, and an officer knocked on the door of the house at 4:28 p.m. He spoke with the parents, the distraught Madison, and took pictures of the house. The parents asked the officer to arrest the boy so he could appear before a judge and answer for his actions. However, it was Sunday, and there would be no judge until Monday. Therefore, Mike agreed to take his son to the station the next day. As the officer later recounted, Mike and April didn't argue with each other and agreed that their son needed to be disciplined. The policeman left at 4:48 p.m., and the parents went to the bedroom to discuss the situation, while their son continued to sit on the couch. However, just 11 minutes later, another call came in to the emergency services. This time it was from Mike's neighbor, who reported that a terrified, handcuffed Madison had rushed to his house, screaming that his father had attacked his mother, and he was worried something might happen to her because his father was armed. The neighbor called 911 and ran to the neighbor's house. He knocked on the door but only heard April's moans. Madison remained outside as the neighbor walked into the bedroom and saw a horrifying scene. Michael and April lay on the floor in a pool of blood. A gun lay beside the man's feet. Michael was dead on the spot, but April was still breathing. She was immediately taken to the hospital, where she died from a gunshot wound to the head. Madison told the police that after the officer left, his parents went into the bedroom where they started arguing loudly. Suddenly, his mother began calling for help. Madison burst into the room, breaking down the door. He saw his father holding his mother in a chokehold with one hand, holding a gun to her head. The boy rushed out of the house to call for help. At first, the police had no doubts that Mike shot his wife and then himself. However, gradually some details emerged that made investigators question this theory. They wondered if Madison could have killed Michael and April. Firstly, Madison claimed to have broken down the door and burst into the bedroom, but police found no signs of damage on the door. Secondly, he claimed not to have heard any gunshots, but experiments showed that even a gunshot from inside the house would have been audible from the neighboring door. Forensic experts examined residue on his hands and found none, but the police explained that sometimes the type of gun used in this case wouldn't leave traces of residue. Additionally, Madison remained handcuffed when the police arrived, which initially seemed to support his innocence. However, he knew that the key was on the coffee table in the living room, indicating that Madison could have taken the key, freed himself, committed the crime, put the handcuffs back on, and then run to the neighbor's house. Moreover, Madison remained relatively calm for someone who had just witnessed such a scene, which didn't sit well with the sheriff. Madison explained that he couldn't cry because he was in a lot of pain and was constantly replaying what happened in his head. Nevertheless, the sheriff decided that some time in jail might make him talk, so he was detained in connection with the events of the previous night. Meanwhile, the pathologist examined the bodies and concluded that the cause of death for both was homicide. The bullets were fired from close range. April was shot on the right side of her head. The bullet also hit her finger, indicating that she was trying to shield herself when she was shot. In Mike's case, the bullet entered the back of his head from the left side and exited on the right. This meant he must have been holding the gun with his left hand, even though he was right-handed, and pressed it against the back of his head. The report from the medical examiner convinced the police that Madison was involved in the deaths of Mike and April. With 3 people in the house and 2 dead, the conclusion seemed clear. Madison was charged with the murder of his parents. At the preliminary hearing, the judge ruled that there was enough evidence for the teenager to stand trial before a jury. He set bail at $1 million, which, of course, the family did not have. A year later, by December 2017, the bail amount was reduced. His uncle Chris and his wife borrowed the required amount and posted bail. The boy was released just before Christmas, which was a wonderful gift for April's relatives. In turn, Mike's family sided with the police. They believed that if Madison was charged so quickly, it meant the police were sure of his guilt. However, April's family, including her parents and brothers, was not ready to accept everything at face value. And the more information emerged before the start of the trial, the more questions it raised. First of all, it is known that the bullets were fired from close range. However, there was not a drop of blood found on Madison's clothing. Could he have changed his clothes? Yes, he could have. But it's important to remember that all of this happened within 11 minutes. Even if we assume he knew where the gun was, he would have had to remove the handcuffs behind his back with a small key, commit the crime, wash up, change clothes, hide the blood-stained clothing where no one would find it, put the handcuffs back on, and run to the neighbor's house. All within 11 minutes. That seems unlikely. Furthermore, after the neighbor's call to emergency services, the same officer who was in the house before arrived at the scene. He confirmed that he did not notice any signs that Madison had changed his clothes or attempted to clean up in the house. Then, the toxicology report showed that there was a cocktail of different strong drugs in Mike's system. 4 different very strong painkillers that he had been regularly taking for 10 years, which could have affected his condition. The police did not find full fingerprints on the weapon, but there was only April's DNA on the trigger. Finally, on Mike's neck and cheek from the right side, the pathologist found several scratches, as well as bruises on his left shoulder. As for April, bruises covered the inner surface of her thighs, chest, and the right side of her face. And under her nails, they found Mike's DNA. This suggests that April scratched her husband while he was holding her in a chokehold, and if he was holding his wife, he was likely doing so with his stronger right hand, while holding the gun in his left. Moreover, acquaintances claimed that Mike was actually ambidextrous, meaning he was equally proficient with both hands. Nonetheless, the coroner's report indicates a struggle and contradicts the police version that Madison suddenly burst into the room and shot the two. Additional information emerged about Mike's behavior in the months and weeks leading up to the crime. He couldn't come to terms with the idea that April might start dating someone else. After the breakup, a friend of his wife assured him that April had no intention of doing so. But a week before the murder, Mike found out that April had entered into a new relationship. He panicked, cried constantly, and called his wife repeatedly. The man wrote a letter to his wife in which he assured her that he couldn't go on living knowing she was with someone else. Even more revealing was Mike's diary, in which he practically bid farewell to all family members. It suggested that he took the breakup very badly, and just a week before the murder, he was contemplating ending his life on his own terms. It was interesting that Madison repeatedly asked investigators if he could undergo a lie detector test to prove his innocence, but he was not allowed to do so. The boy's story never changed, and he remained steadfast in his account of what happened. He was offered deals, but he refused each time because he was not going to confess to something he didn't do. As for his lack of emotions after the deaths of Mike and April, this should never be the basis for accusing someone of murder, especially a teenager. Prior to this, the biggest problem in his life was his parents' punishment for marijuana use, but in an instant, he lost Mike and April and found himself accused of their murder. Everything happened. On October 22, 2018, Madison was preparing to appear in court. However, just before the start of the trial, the district attorney announced that the charges against the teenager would be dropped. The entire case was based on it being a double homicide, but in reality, the pathologist could not completely rule out the possibility that Michael shot himself. The district attorney stated, "Our job as prosecutors is to seek the truth and deliver justice. When we cannot ascertain the truth, it is impossible to achieve justice." He explained that there are 3 theories of what happened. Madison killed Michael in April. Madison witnessed his father killing his mother and shot him out of revenge. Or Michael shot his wife and then himself. All 3 theories have merit, and there is no evidence that definitively disproves or proves any of them. The prosecutor added that if new evidence of Madison's guilt emerges, he will face a jury trial and be found guilty. But if the jury acquits him now, and he is guilty, he cannot be tried again, and he will enjoy freedom with impunity for the rest of his days. Today, Madison admits that going through all the trials was helped by his maternal family, who did not turn away from him in difficult times. He hopes to mend relationships with his brothers and relatives from his father's side, and does not plan to file a lawsuit against the city police, at least because it was one of the conditions for dropping the charges. He acknowledges that if it weren't for the time spent alone with his thoughts in prison, he would have continued to party and hang out with a bad crowd. The days of throwing noisy parties are far behind him now. Madison has completed his final year of high school and plans to attend college, become a lawyer, and defend people in need. But before that, he decided to fulfill his long-standing dream and joined the army. The young man married a girl named Diana, became a father, and is absolutely happy. However, Madison does not deny that he is constantly haunted by the fear that the sheriff will try to accuse him again of the murders of Mike and April. He cannot even discuss all the details of what happened because he has not been proven innocent. He simply was not charged. On the deep night of November 8, 1992, spouses Jerry and Ruth were returning home from a nightclub. It was 1:15 a.m. when they noticed a 1989 Burgundy Buick Somerset parked by the roadside. It seemed peculiar to them as the engine was running, and not only were the car headlights on, but the interior light was also illuminated. However, there appeared to be no one in or around the car. Jerry wanted to get out to check if everything was okay, but Ruth had a better idea. She suggested that they drive about 3 kilometers to the sheriff's office in Benton, Missouri, and report what they had seen. That's exactly what they did. After hearing the account from the spouses, the sheriff's deputies headed to the specified location on the highway, near a local trailer park. Upon arrival, they also noticed no one around. However, upon looking inside, they saw a person. It appeared that a wounded young woman was inside. She lay on her right side with her legs on the driver's seat pulled up to her chest. Her head rested on the passenger seat, partially on a purse. Her lifeless left arm hung down to the floor, and her right arm lay beneath her torso. The victim was wearing a sweatshirt and button-up jeans with the top 4 buttons undone, and the jeans were pulled down, exposing the back of her left leg. She had no shoes on, and her socks were covered in grass and dirt. The officers did not find a wallet, but the woman's rings were lying on the car dashboard. What truly shocked them was the amount of blood covering her face and head. The passenger side door was locked, and the window was completely closed. However, on the driver's side, the door was unlocked, and the window was partially open. Taking advantage of this, one officer opened the door and checked the victim's pulse. There was no pulse, but her skin still felt warm and tender. The officers found several shell casings and realized that this couldn't be a mere accident. Using flashlights, they attempted to inspect if anyone was hiding in the bushes, but all they discovered was even more blood, seemingly everywhere. At the same time, a tall young man in a dark shirt and jeans walked into the sheriff's office in Benton, Missouri, and approached the officer who was just dispatching an ambulance to the crime scene. The officer recognized the young man as one of the Abbott sons, whose parents owned a 24-hour gas station, a trailer park, and several other businesses. The Abbott sons also worked at the gas station. The young man introduced himself, and the officer noted down that his name was Matt Abbott. He mentioned that he lived in a trailer park near the highway, and while driving by, noticed the Buick. However, unlike Jerry and Ruth, he approached the Buick and found the lifeless girl. The young man was visibly shaken and on the verge of hysteria. The officer listened to his account and told him to go home. They would contact him later. The officer did not check his identification or take initial statements. Certainly, with a population of only 600 people, the sheriff's assistant in the small town of Benton might never have dealt with murders before, but it was still one of many mistakes made by the police in this case. However, one sheriff's deputy remained at the crime scene, working when he was interrupted. He observed a car turning toward him from the direction of the trailer park nearby. A young man exited the vehicle. The officer thought the guy was Hispanic or Mexican, aged between 25 and 30, and spoke with a strong accent. In broken English, he explained that he was running out of gas. When the deputy pointed out the 24-hour gas station, the man got back in his car and left. As the officer didn't find the man suspicious, he didn't record the license plate or ask for identification, something a more experienced officer might have done. Wasn't it strange that a stranger drove directly to the crime scene in the middle of the night? He could have witnessed something, and now his identity remains unknown. But the surprises of the night didn't end there. About 2 minutes later, around 1:40 a.m., another car did the same, turned on the road before the trailer park and approached the officer. A tall young man in a light shirt and jeans stepped out. He claimed to be the one who found the victim in the car and wanted to know if she was dead. The officer asked if the young man had been to the sheriff's office to report this, and he answered yes. The police officer radioed in and confirmed that it was Matt Abbott. He had indeed been to the sheriff's office and was told to go home and await further instructions, which meant that's exactly what he should do. Soon, an ambulance arrived at the scene. The doctors confirmed the victim's death. By 12 p.m., County Sheriff Bill Farrell arrived. By that time, it was already known that the victim was 19-year-old Michelle Lawless. Sheriff Farrell knew the girl's parents, so he wanted to inform them of her death personally, after which they would proceed with questioning the witnesses. Angela Michelle Lawless, who preferred to be called Michelle, had graduated from high school just a year ago and started attending university. She was studying nursing and worked as a waitress in a neighboring town. She still lived with her parents because her attempt to move out on her own fell through when her friend changed her mind and couldn't be her apartment mate. Michelle was very active. She sang in the choir, was a scout, and participated in various organizations. She also practiced martial arts, earning a green belt. And despite her petite stature of 152 centimeters, she was not an easy target. She clearly fought for her life, attempting to escape her assailant, but he caught up with her. The forensic pathologist confirmed that Michelle died from 3 gunshot wounds to the head and back, fired .38 caliber automatic pistol. Based on the trajectory of the bullets and the position of the body in the car, it was deduced that the assailant began shooting when Michelle was seated directly in the driver's seat, facing her killer. After that, 2 more shots were quickly fired. However, the attack began before that. Judging by the marks on the grass and the substantial amount of blood, Michelle was assaulted near the car, resisted, attempted to escape, but the killer caught up with her, brought her back to the car, and struck her head with a blunt object. These injuries were not fatal, but it was due to them that Michelle lost so much blood. Alcohol was found in Michelle's system, but only in small amounts, not exceeding the legal limit for driving. She did not consume any prohibited substances, and there were no signs of violence, although evidence suggested that Michelle had spent the evening with a man. Blood samples from 2 different types were found under her fingernails. Many fingerprints were smeared, except for 3 palm prints on the car's body. They could belong to Michelle, but during the autopsy, no one took her fingerprints, another oversight in the investigation. The first suspect and the person sheriff and his assistant spoke to was Michelle's boyfriend, Leon Lamb, the last person to see her alive. In reality, he wasn't exactly her boyfriend. Michelle and Leon had been on and off for several years. Michelle wrote in her diary that she deeply loved him and wanted more from him, but he felt he wasn't ready for it. Her desperate attempts to bind him to her by claiming she was expecting his child also proved unsuccessful. Nonetheless, the young couple occasionally met and spent time together. On that evening, they crossed paths several times, which was natural for such a small town. Later, when Leon returned home after his taekwondo training around midnight, he heard a knock on the door. It was Michelle, intoxicated. They chatted, made love, and she left about an hour later. Leon shared another intriguing detail. Michelle hesitated before heading home. First, she asked if she could stay at Leon's, and when he declined, she requested a ride home. She had never asked for such favors before. However, after that, she hastily gathered her things and left without fully fastening her jeans. She carried her bra and shoes in her hand. Considering that Michelle left at 12:45 a.m. and the witnesses, Jerry and Ruth, found the car at 1:15 a.m., it meant that the crime occurred within 15 minutes, as it took an additional 15 minutes to drive from Leon's place to where the car was found. Leon's family owned a gun, but it was not the same caliber used to kill Michelle. Leon willingly consented to a search of his car and passed a polygraph test. Next, the sheriff and his assistant questioned Michelle's best friends, Laisha Odell and Chantel Kreider. The girls confirmed Leon's account of crossing paths with them several times, but mentioned a slightly different time frame. It was around midnight when Michelle dropped Laisha off at home. However, it takes 30 minutes to drive to Leon's place, so someone might be confusing the young people's timelines. Once again, Michelle offered her friend to spend the night at her place, but Laisha declined, citing an early work schedule. Michelle then asked if she could stay at Laisha's, but her room smelled of paint due to renovations, and Laisha slept on the couch. In light of what Leon mentioned about Michelle not wanting to go home alone, this becomes very intriguing. It seems like she might have been aware of imminent danger and preferred not to be alone. It was time to talk to Matt Abbott, the young man who first discovered the victim's body. However, finding him wasn't as straightforward, and when officers inquired with Matt's father about his whereabouts, he replied that they had mistaken him for Mark. He claimed that it was Mark who spoke with them at the sheriff's office, because Mark lived in the trailer park near the highway. The twist in the story is that 23-year-old Matt and Mark are identical twins, and while they can be distinguished visually, they often successfully posed as each other. When officers finally managed to reach Matt, he confirmed that he was indeed at the sheriff's office. Matt told the police that he was heading home in a black Chevrolet pickup around 1:10 a.m. when he noticed a car with its headlights on. As he approached the car, he saw a person jumping into a ditch upon his approach. However, he couldn't get a good look at the person and couldn't provide a description. Moreover, this mysterious person never appeared in Mark's subsequent statements. Inside the car, Matt noticed a person, and based on the rings on their hand, he deduced it was a girl. Initially, he thought she had drunk too much and fallen asleep. He reached through the fully open window on the driver's side and lifted her. He saw that the girl was covered in blood, and her body had already cooled. Realizing she was not just drunk but dead, he got scared and went to the police. There were several peculiarities in Matt's statements. Firstly, how could he see Michelle's rings when the police found them on the dashboard? Secondly, why did Matt perceive her body as cold when the officers who arrived later described her skin as warm? Considering the timing, it seemed that she was killed just before Matt arrived, and her body couldn't have cooled down. Thirdly, the car window was half open, and physically, Matt couldn't have squeezed inside and lifted Michelle as he described. Lastly, why did he return to the crime scene? And how did it happen that he was in a different shirt and driving a different car? What if it was not Mark, but his identical twin brother Matt? Mark's account of the events continued to change. Later on, he remembered that after discovering Michelle murdered, he didn't immediately head to the sheriff's office, but instead went to a payphone in the store parking lot. He claimed that he was dialing 911 when a man in a white car approached him. This man, possibly of Spanish or Mexican descent, told Mark that he was running out of fuel and asked for a ride to the gas station. Mark found this request strange. The stranger had a car, so why did he need a ride? Feeling uneasy, Mark got into his car and drove to the sheriff's office while the man continued talking. The description of this man matched the one who asked the police officer about gasoline at the crime scene. However, what's peculiar is that Mark remembered this encounter only after having a private conversation with Sheriff Farrell. The background of Mark and Matt's family is worth mentioning. They belonged to a wealthy and respected family in the town, and their opinions were influential. The twins' father was friends with the sheriff and even contributed money to his election campaign. The twins themselves were considered charming, fun-loving, and popular individuals. However, by 1992, 23-year-old Mark and Matt had earned a reputation not just as fun guys, but as troublemakers. They were involved in alcohol, often driving under the influence, had a casual approach to relationships, and were known to engage in theft for the sake of amusement. A mutual friend even stated that the twins associated with genuinely bad individuals, such as Mark's old friend Kevin Williams, and wouldn't be surprised if they ended up killing someone. Rumors circulated that they not only used but also dealt illegal substances. Additionally, there were whispers that the illegal drug trade was somehow connected to the trailer park near the crime scene. However, In 1992, these were merely rumors. Weeks passed without new evidence, arrests, or suspects, when suddenly, after 4 months in February 1993, an unexpected breakthrough occurred. 4 inmates reported overhearing an 18-year-old boy who had previously served time for a misdemeanor, confessing to the murder of Michelle. His name was Joshua Kaiser. No one in Michelle's circle had ever heard of him, but when his photo was shown to Mark Abbott, he recognized the pale, blue-eyed young man as the driver of the white car who had asked for a ride to the gas station. He described him as a Spanish or Mexican guy with a tan and an accent. When the police knocked on Joshua's door, he was living with his father in Illinois. Joshua didn't even consider confessing to the crime. Furthermore, he insisted that he didn't know Michelle, and he had no reason to kill her. But when his family realized that the police were serious and he was facing a real trial, they gathered all the money they had to hire a better lawyer. The lawyer spoke with the inmates who accused Joshua, and it turned out they conspired to accuse him because they were certain he was innocent and wouldn't be convicted for anything. While in jail, they remembered the Benton murder and decided to use it to their advantage. They suddenly decided to tell them that Joshua committed the murder so that the prosecution would reduce their sentences. However, when 2 inmates recanted their statements, 2 more took their place. Since Joshua was waiting for the trial in jail, his cellmates claimed that he confessed to the murder, and they even said he talked about it in his sleep. Despite the dubious testimony of the inmates, the trial proceeded, and Joshua faced charges for the murder of Michelle Lawless. When the trial began, the prosecutor tried to drill into the heads of the jurors that Josh was a member of a dangerous street gang. Mark became the star witness for the state, identifying Josh as the guy who scared him by asking for a ride to the gas station. Despite this, the trial started promisingly for Josh. His lawyer managed to prove that the young man couldn't have been near the crime scene. On the evening of Michelle's murder, Josh's cousin had an accident, and Josh immediately went to check on his health. He wouldn't have had time to visit his brother in Kankakee, Illinois at 11:30 p.m., and then drive almost 600 kilometers in 2 hours to shoot a girl he, according to Sheriff Farrell's admission, didn't know. Numerous witnesses confirmed that Josh was with his brother, and even though he recently joined a street gang, he wasn't a violent person, let alone a murderer. Overall, the case was going in favor of the defense until the prosecutor called an unexpected witness, one of Michelle's best friends, Chantel Kreider. She claimed to have seen the defendant in October, a week before Michelle's murder, at a Halloween party. While all their friends were outside by the bonfire, Michelle and Chantel went into the house to use the bathroom. A guy she didn't know at the time, but now identified as Josh, approached them. He tried to make advances towards the girls, and when they rejected him, he got angry, insulted Michelle, and ran away. According to Chantel, he was very drunk. She added that as they were leaving the party around midnight, the same guy approached their car, grabbed the door handle, and demanded a ride. He continued yelling and holding onto the door until they drove away. In court, she looked directly at Josh and said she remembered his face. She was absolutely certain he was at the party. Jurors heard that the only physical evidence against Josh was the blood found on his jacket. The prosecution had no fingerprints or DNA on Josh, and the blood type under Michelle's fingernails didn't match his. Nevertheless, due to the dubious testimonies of the inmates Mark and Chantel, after 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty. Josh was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 60 years in prison. After Josh's conviction, several girls who attended the Halloween party, including the hostess of the house, reached out to Josh's lawyer, stating that Chantel either made a mistake or blatantly lied. They compiled a list of all the guests at that party, and Josh was definitely not among them. Moreover, they witnessed Michelle, Laisha, and Chantel leaving, and no one chased their car, holding onto the door handle. Furthermore, the guy who insulted Michelle was not a mysterious stranger. His name was Todd, and he didn't resemble Josh at all. The guest list from that party was handed over to Sheriff Farrell, but it unexpectedly disappeared, and no new investigation was initiated. Time passed, and January 2006 arrived. Sheriff Farrell had been in office for almost 30 years when he was succeeded by Rick Walter. Rick Walter was one of the officers who first arrived at the scene of Michelle's murder. He conducted the interrogation of Mark Abbott and never liked the outcome of Michelle's case and Josh Keezer's conviction, because there were still unanswered and crucial questions. Firstly, how did Josh manage to get from Kankakee to Benton so quickly? And why would he want to kill Michelle? A girl's rejection at a party is a weak motive to drive almost 600 kilometers to track her down and kill her a week later. The new sheriff was convinced, even if Josh was involved in the murder, there must be another motive, and likely other people were involved. Therefore, becoming sheriff, he quietly decided to reopen the case. It was a risky decision since the case was considered closed, and the guilty one was in prison. Financially and ethically, it must have been a very difficult choice. So he tried to act without attracting attention, but just a week later, someone named Kevin Williams appeared in his office, a friend of Mark Abbott. The new sheriff hadn't even compiled a list of suspects yet, and Kevin was already eager to tell him that he knew he was the main suspect, but he had an alibi, his wife, who was his girlfriend at the time of Michelle's murder. And on that fateful evening, they were together. Overall, it was a very strange visit that cast an even greater shadow on Sheriff Farrell, especially since he was the one who warned Kevin Williams that he was a suspect. Nevertheless, the investigation continued. The sheriff asked an investigator from another town to work on the case to ensure impartiality. Initially, as the investigator began to review the evidence, it seemed like Josh had been fairly convicted. However, the more he examined the case materials, the more he realized that Josh did not belong in prison. Firstly, the inmates who initially cast a shadow on Josh recanted their statements, explaining that they just wanted to strike a deal with the prosecutor to get their sentences reduced. Then, a key prosecution witness, Chantel, admitted that she lied on the witness stand at the request of Sheriff Farrell, who spent several hours convincing her of the invaluable service she would provide to the investigation by linking Josh to Michelle. The blood supposedly found on Josh's jacket was not blood at all, despite what the jurors heard. Finally, the testimonies of numerous witnesses indicated that Josh did not know Michelle and was 600 kilometers away from her during both the murder and the Halloween party. Thanks to the efforts of the new sheriff, Josh was given the opportunity for a case review. All the evidence was presented to the judge, who had to decide whether to proceed with a new trial. However, on February 17, 2009, the judge made an unusual decision. Instead of a new trial, he declared Josh innocent of Michelle's murder. Josh spent almost 16 years, the prime years of his life, in the notorious Missouri prison known as the Walls. Although it is now closed, it was once a frightening place that earned the nickname 48 Bloody Acres in America. The fragile young man was repeatedly beaten there. He found himself on a hospital bed multiple times and admits that sometimes he thought it would be better not to regain consciousness. Finally, after 16 years of horror, he walked free as an innocent man. Although justice prevailed for Josh, it was still necessary to secure the conviction of the real killer or killers of Michelle. In 2009, the new sheriff decided to re-examine Michelle's belongings for DNA. On her sweatshirt, in the areas where the assailant might have grabbed her, 3 DNA samples were found in addition to Michelle's own DNA. One of these DNA samples matched Mark's, partially confirming his story. He claimed to have touched her left shoulder, but the DNA was found on the right side. Moreover, DNA was found on the inner side of Michelle's right arm. Under the girl's fingernails, they found her boyfriend's DNA, but he never hid the fact that they were together that night and were passionate lovers. In 2013, Michelle's body was exhumed to study the DNA on her body. This could have been done in the year of the murder, but for some reason, it was not. The sheriff went ahead with this, rereading the report on the initial autopsy, which stated that there were non-lethal wounds on her hands, most likely scratches. Unfortunately, the results were not obtained because the pathologist washed the body and covered it with a substance that prevented DNA analysis. However, the samples are still stored in the laboratory in case technological advancements allow for their future examination. What about Mark Abbott, who was the main prosecution witness in the trial against Josh? While the unjustly convicted young man continued to languish in prison, many people reached out to the police with information that pointed not to Josh, but to other individuals. Mark Abbott, Matt Abbott, and their father, involved in a large network of illegal substances trade in Missouri. The sheriff seemed to know a bit more than he wanted to reveal. After the trial of Josh, a major operation took place, leading to the arrest and interrogation of many involved in this network. In 1997, the same year Mark Abbott was sentenced to 20 years in connection with illegal substances, he told an officer during an interrogation that on the night of Michelle's murder, he was with his friend Kevin Williams, and it was Kevin who shot Michelle. According to him, Kevin and Michelle had a romantic relationship, and she told him she was expecting his child. That evening, Kevin wanted to talk to her. They followed her car and Mark flashed his headlights for her to stop. However, the conversation did not go well, Kevin and Michelle argued, and Mark heard gunshots. After that, Kevin fled towards the trailer park while Mark went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Farrell later claimed he had not seen Mark's statements, but that was untrue, and there was more to it. Mark was not the only witness connecting Kevin to the crime scene. On the night of Michelle's murder, a man named Dallas Butler was riding his motorcycle to his mother's house in Mississippi when his headlights illuminated a parked car in the darkness. He saw a woman lying on the steering wheel and a man in a red cap standing beside the car, partially leaning inside. The man told him to go on because everything was fine, but the motorcyclist remembered the woman not moving, seemingly unconscious, and he did not like the situation. He reported it but heard nothing more about Michelle's case until 2009. In 2015, he was invited to the police for identification, and Dallas chose a photo of Kevin Williams as the person he saw near Michelle's car that night. All this happened exactly 2 months after Kevin's wife, who had once provided him with an alibi for that evening, left him and claimed that he was not with her that night. Mark's statements answered many questions about what happened that night, especially why Michelle stopped just 2 kilometers from home in the middle of the highway. Moreover, if Kevin could escape towards the trailer park after the murder, Mark could have returned to the crime scene to pick up his friend, because that moment always raised many questions. But there is one nuance. None of Michelle's friends heard her mention that she was dating Kevin. There was no mention of him in the girl's diary, where she detailed all her relationships. Instead, Michelle told her friends that she found Mark Abbott attractive. But there's a problem. There are 2 of them, Mark and Matt, twins, and the sheriff still does not know which one reported the murder to the station and which one returned to the crime scene. So the reason for Michelle's death could be that she was involved with Mark and told him about her condition. Or she found out about the Abbott family's deep involvement in the illegal substances trade. Even a friend of the Abbott family, the owner of a gun store, heard Mark say he took care of the scumbag. But after so many mistakes on the part of inexperienced assistants to Sheriff Benton, it will be challenging to get to the truth. Essentially, Kevin will claim that the killer is Mark, while Mark will insist that the killer is Kevin. However, the fact that they almost openly declare this suggests they consider themselves untouchable. Analyzing the course of the investigation into this case, one can argue that the killer would not have gotten away with this crime anywhere else but in Benton. As for Josh, after his release, he filed a lawsuit and received $4 million, $10,000 of which he handed over to the sheriff's office to be used for capturing the real killer of Michelle. According to him, the investigation is not standing still, and there might be an arrest of a suspect or suspects soon. Moreover, he is confident that being falsely accused of Michelle's murder was not a coincidence because he has always been characterized by stubbornness, and it is precisely this trait that will enable him not to abandon this case and see it through to the end.
Toledo, Ohio, January 27, 1992. At midnight, a call came in to the local taxi company reporting that 3 unidentified individuals had attacked a taxi driver in the parking lot of the University of Toledo student housing. The caller also mentioned hearing gunshots. The call was redirected to the 911 rescue service, and from there, to the University of Toledo officers. 2 colleagues, Joseph Green and Jeffrey Hodge, immediately headed to the specified location. It was quiet and peaceful there, the ground covered in snow, with no signs of the crime that had occurred. Neither the taxi, nor the driver, nor the assailants were noticeable. Nevertheless, the 2 colleagues decided to look around, to walk around the entire parking area. Lighting their way with flashlights, the 2 officers turned the corner of the building and saw the body. It was a girl lying face down in the snow. The unusual position of her body stood out. Her hands were placed neatly at her sides, palms up. People don't usually fall like that. The victim was without a coat. Her dark blue sweater pulled up, and her jeans and underwear pulled down, fully exposing the midsection of her body. And in those areas of exposed skin, bullet holes were visible. There was also a bullet wound on the back of her head. The most obvious assumption, considering the appearance of the girl's clothing, was that she had been attacked with the intent of sexual violence. The victim didn't have any documents with her, but on the same evening, her roommate reported her disappearance. The victim's name was Melissa Anne Herstrum. Melissa was a 19-year-old student at the University of Toledo, studying to become a nurse. Melissa stood out among other students. She was very beautiful, cheerful, with dark wavy hair and distinctive bright lipstick that emphasized her vivacity and zest for life. Melissa had no enemies, especially not ones who would wish her harm. She wanted to have children and believed she would be a wonderful mother. No one doubted this, knowing what a sincere and kind person she was. She had so much to offer to the world, but she was prevented from doing so in the most callous way. Meanwhile, detectives from the Toledo City Homicide Department were investigating the crime scene. Shell casings were scattered everywhere, and some bullets had passed through the victim's body and into the frozen ground, so the detectives decided to dig them up along with the soil. Interestingly, one of the casings appeared as if it had been split in half by something. Additionally, not far from the crime scene, officers found a set of keys in a trash bin, and notably, among them were keys to a Ford Taurus. Police discovered the Ford approximately a kilometer from the girl's murder site, in a parking lot. What was intriguing was that the crime scene, the trash bin where the keys were found, and the parking lot were 3 different points on the campus map, and the detectives had to connect these points into a cohesive whole. The coroner took Melissa's body to conduct an autopsy. The examination revealed that Melissa had been shot 14 times at close range with a 9mm handgun. She was shot in the back of the head, causing her to fall to the ground, with her hands likely tied behind her back. Then, the killer fired another 13 bullets, shooting her in the back and descending to her legs. It was an incredibly brutal murder, as such a number of bullets was completely excessive. The pathologist ruled out the possibility of sexual assault. There was not the slightest sign of violence. However, she was partly undressed. This means the killer either aimed to humiliate her or wanted to see the damage caused by bullets hitting her exposed body. There was no alcohol or drugs in her system. She was completely sober. Marks on her wrists indicated that at some point she was immobilized with something, resembling handcuff marks. The detectives had no choice but to ask themselves who would use handcuffs. Primarily, representatives of law enforcement, or someone pretending to be a policeman. It wouldn't be the first time a killer, pretending to be a policeman, stopped a victim's car and committed a crime. Handcuffs are a means of control, so their suspect is someone seeking complete control over their victims. The news of the murder of the student quickly spread throughout the university campus. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that shortly before the murder, an unknown individual began terrorizing one of the female dormitories. Someone opened fire in the building, firing 9 shots, which were later removed from the walls. Considering that these incidents occurred practically one after another, everyone assumed that they were connected, because such things had never happened before at the University of Toledo. Indeed, it was the first murder on campus in decades, and the students were horrified. Melissa's friends couldn't understand how this could happen, why, and who could have done it. Everyone loved her. It didn't make sense. There were 30 girls living in that dormitory, and they no longer felt safe. Someone called their parents, and they took them home. Melissa's friends were worried that they were in danger, but investigators believed that Melissa was the target because of the brutality of the crime, the 14 shots, when the killer kept shooting at a dead girl. It looked like a crime that could only happen in a fit of incredible rage. Detectives interviewed Melissa's friends about how she spent the evening of January 26th. It turned out that she met up with a friend from the university's women's club, sorority, after which she planned to return home. However, someone called her and informed her that her boyfriend, JR, was spending time with another girl. So Melissa went to the parking lot adjacent to where JR lived. From there, she would be able to see when he returned home and with whom. It was for this reason that the police's initial suspicion fell on her boyfriend. Jealousy and anger often become the motives behind many thoughtless acts, especially since the 14 bullets fired into the immobilized girl indicated the rage of the attacker. Melissa's boyfriend, JR, stated that he was indeed with another girl at his home that evening. He didn't see Melissa and had no idea that someone had informed her of his infidelity. However, things were not as simple as they seemed. Investigators found out that Melissa's personal life was more complicated than it appeared at first glance because she was hiding her new relationship from her ex-boyfriend, Kenny. Kenny was a very volatile person, the kind who gets into fights in bars, can punch a wall in anger, and yell threats in fits of rage. Naturally, the question arose of what Kenny would do if he found out about Melissa's new relationship. Thus, the police suddenly had 2 suspects, the unfaithful boyfriend and the aggressive ex-boyfriend. Both were invited for questioning. They answered questions candidly, sincerely wanting to help the investigation, passed polygraph tests, and had alibis, meaning neither of them had any connection to the crime. However, now that both guys had been ruled out as suspects and no new ones emerged, panic began to spread throughout the university campus. Everyone understood that it still could be a random murder, and fear gripped the University of Toledo. A pair of girls from the women's dormitory reported receiving strange, threatening calls. It was the same dormitory where the unknown assailant had fired shots. The girls were so terrified that university officers escorted them to and from their classes. Since no one suspected who the killer was or why he targeted Melissa, everyone wondered who would be next, fearing that the killer could emerge from around any corner at any moment. Despite this, everyone had to continue studying and working. The detectives, contemplating their next move, noticed similarities between Melissa's murder and recent victims of a serial killer. In Los Angeles, the killer, dubbed the Mountain Strangler by the police, had murdered 10 young women and left their bodies in the mountains along the highway. Sometimes serial killers pose as police officers because it's so easy to set up a flashing light for a car, stop the victim, abduct, and kill. However, this version seemed too far-fetched. Therefore, with no suspects and feeling the tension from the growing panic on campus, the investigators returned to square one. More precisely, it was the call to the taxi dispatch when the caller reported that robbers had attacked a taxi driver. Detectives investigating Melissa's case decided to trace the call and found out that it came from a campus service building, which was locked on weekends, meaning the caller must have had keys. What did this reveal to the investigators? It indicated that the killer had keys to the locked facility. Meanwhile, the victim's hands were likely bound with handcuffs, typically positioned behind the back as police are taught. Reluctantly, the investigators had to admit the obvious. It wasn't a serial killer posing as a police officer, but an actual police officer. Detectives decided to speak with Joseph Green and Jeffrey Hodge again, the two officers from the University of Toledo who found the body. Perhaps they had overlooked some evidence. In fact, both officers had very positive reputations. Joseph was a friendly young man who told silly jokes and was just a pleasant guy. Jeffrey Hodge was also a quiet, modest man who had recently gotten married. He loved his job, was a bit of a Boy Scout, always eager to help, and had previously worked as a 911 dispatcher. He was very eager to contribute to the investigation. Detectives decided to start by questioning Joseph Green because he was the one who found the body and wrote the report. On that day, around 7 o'clock in the evening, it was snowing heavily. The girl had left her friend's place before the snowfall, meaning when Melissa and her killer appeared at the crime scene, there was already snow, and there should have been footprints in the snow. However, according to Joseph Green's report, there were no shoe prints on the ground, only freshly fallen snow. This obvious discrepancy with the facts puzzled the detectives, because it was unclear why the police officers went to inspect the area at all, if the snow was untouched and there were no footprints leading there. Moreover, they were the ones who found Melissa's keys in the trash bin. What prompted them to look into the trash bin? There was something else that puzzled the investigators. Joseph said, "When I saw the body, I knew she was dead." The investigator was surprised and asked how that was possible. Joseph replied that his family owned a funeral business and he had seen many dead bodies. While these weren't incriminating pieces of evidence, the combined facts urged the investigators to dig deeper. Forensic investigators examined both officers' cars who were on duty that night. They were looking for physical evidence that could tie Melissa to one of the patrol cars. They couldn't find any fingerprints, but they discovered a green wool thread that matched the girl's coat. Additionally, they found a long hair on the seat. At that time, they couldn't conduct DNA comparison on the hair, but it matched the color of the victim's hair. These were more indirect pieces of evidence, but still significant. Officer Joseph wrote a report in which inconsistencies were noted. Now, with the evidence found, the hair and thread in the patrol car, the evidence against Officer Joseph Green began to accumulate one after another like a snowball. He became the main suspect in the investigation. Detectives kept an eye on him, showing up at his house in the middle of the night to collect discarded trash, trying to find something that could link him to the crime. Ultimately, detectives decided to polygraph all officers involved in the case. Joseph Green was the first to be tested, but his test came out clean. Therefore, they had to leave him alone. The only thing that continued to bother the police was his certainty about the absence of shoe prints. Usually, when a police officer sees someone in distress, they rush to them immediately, and that's probably what Green did. So he probably wasn't certain, but insisted on the absence of shoe prints, making detectives suspect him. With Joseph Green, his partner Jeffrey Hodge arrived. Nobody suspected him, but it was decided to polygraph everyone just in case. Before Melissa's body was found, and before Jeffrey started his night shift, he watched the Super Bowl with friends, including other officers. Jeffrey, for some reason, seemed nervous, asking about ballistics, how long a body can remain under certain conditions before decomposition, what it's like to see a body, essentially asking quite strange questions. He also turned on the homeowner's radio on the police frequency. Of course, friends asked him what he was doing, to which he replied that he just wants to know what's going on before going to work. Now, at the station, waiting for the results of his partner's check. He opened up to one of the detectives and mentioned how funny it was to watch the girls from the women's dormitory running out into the street in light, translucent clothing when the fire alarm went off. Such conversations were not illegal, but clearly inappropriate and unbecoming for a married officer tasked with protecting these girls, especially considering it was the same dormitory where the girls were suffering from strange calls and gunshots. Nevertheless, Jeffrey went to the polygraph examiner next. As part of the preparation, he was asked various questions, such as what he considered the best thing that happened in his life, to which he answered, working as a police officer. Jeffrey had worked as an operator for the rescue service, and had tried to get into various police departments until he was finally hired by the university. And for his graduation, his grandfather gave him a pistol. The polygraph examiner casually asked which one, and he replied, Smith & Wesson, the same type of pistol from which the fatal bullets could have been fired. The polygraph examiner tensed up but didn't show it, remembering that Jeffrey Hodgson had been at the crime scene and knew how the victim was dressed, the position of the body, and the shell casings found. The polygraph examiner had to work somewhat unusually and formulate a variety of similar questions. For example, was the victim bound with a belt, stockings, wire, tape, handcuffs? And here the polygraph showed how Jeffrey Hodgson clearly reacted to handcuffs. That was enough to cast doubt on him. The detectives asked him to show the pistol given to him by his grandfather. The man agreed and said it was in the locker at the university. But there was no weapon there, and Jeffrey claimed that someone wanted to set him up, which was strange. If someone really wanted to set him up, the gun would have been there. Instead, Jeffrey's handcuffs were confiscated. They were taken to the laboratory and examined under a microscope. Traces of copper and lead, metals associated with bullets, were found on them. Considering that one bullet had fragmented upon impact with something hard, these could well have been the handcuffs. And on their inner rim, specialists found a tiny fragment of skin. However, extracting DNA from such a tiny fragment was not easy at that time and required time. Jeffrey was arrested on February 1, 1992, 6 days after Melissa's murder. After his arrest, it suddenly became clear that he didn't seem like a nice guy to everyone around him. Girls recounted how he would stop them on fabricated pretexts, claiming they were drunk. Anne Collins was stopped by Jeffrey almost a day before Melissa's murder. She parked her car in an almost empty parking lot, and he pulled up behind her, blocking her. She hadn't been drinking, so she didn't understand why he was asking her about it. Fortunately, the persistence of the young officer seemed strange to her, and she talked to him without getting out of the car, just opening the window slightly. Anne feared and imagined what could have happened if her boyfriend hadn't shown up, with whom they were supposed to have breakfast together. She's sure she would have been Jeffrey Hodgson's first victim. But when her boyfriend appeared, Jeffrey quickly got back into his car and just drove away. Unfortunately, the next evening, he stopped another girl, Melissa Herstrum, without any reason. The students were horrified when they learned the name of the arrested man. After all, Jeffrey had escorted them to classes when they were scared, told them he was working on the case, and everything would be fine. In other words, he presented himself as a knight in shining armor, although they were actually afraid of him. The case against Hodgson was built on circumstantial evidence until 3 weeks after his arrest, when the DNA test results came in. The fragment of skin on his handcuffs belonged to Melissa Herstrum. In 1993, 18 months after the murder, Jeffrey pleaded guilty to the murder in exchange for a life sentence with the possibility of parole. He limited his admission to just that and claimed he didn't remember anything about the crime itself. It's unlikely that this is true. He probably remembers every little detail. But even without his confession, detectives had a version of what happened to Melissa that evening. Jeffrey Hodgson patrolled the area of the college campus. It wasn't his first time stopping pretty girls. Unfortunately, Melissa was alone on the street that evening. She wasn't drunk, but she was alone. She didn't have her driver's license with her, and instead of a warning or a fine, Jeffrey Hodgson forced her to get into his car and drove her to the dormitory, where she got her license. He convinced her to take off her coat and put it on the back seat of the car so he could get a better look at her body. He was supposed to take her back to her car, but during the ride, he began to harass her. Melissa didn't like it, and she probably told him that such behavior would cost him his job. Another person might have ignored this, but not Jeffrey Hodgson. A man who considered being a policeman the best thing that ever happened in his life didn't see himself in any other role. He drove the girl to a remote parking lot, pulled Melissa out of the car, frightened her, handcuffed her, and led her around the corner of the building. This is where he pulled down her clothes, humiliating her, and reached a point where he was horrified by what he had done and saw the only way out for himself in murder. and he shot the girl in the back of the head. Later, he called the dispatcher so he and his partner could answer the call and find the body. After all, he knew for sure that he had left footprints in the snow and needed an explanation of how they got there. He manipulated his partner, allowing him to find the body and write the report. Jeffrey Hodgson also confessed to making threatening calls and shooting at the dormitory. He did this to once again respond to the call himself and appear a hero in the eyes of others. His cruelty quickly escalated, and it all ended with him killing a person. The former police captain, who headed the homicide department in 1992, said, in his opinion, Jeff Hodgson is a psychopath. It showed in how his crimes escalated. He believes if they hadn't caught him, he would have become a serial killer. He would have struck again. When he was formally dismissed in March 1992, representatives of the university found that he often stopped students, or rather female students, without informing the dispatcher. Once he called a girl's home several hours after arresting her for drunk driving. Fabricated reports of robbery and an armed man on campus, as well as violated rules by waiting for students in bars outside the campus and following them to the student village, where he stopped them on suspicion of driving while intoxicated. It is believed that he made a call about a planned bombing against the university president and started fires, committing crimes that he himself investigated. He was not charged with other offenses investigated by the University of Toledo police. The prosecutor offered him a deal because the main evidence against him was DNA. They didn't even find his personal gun from which he fired at the dormitory and at Melissa. But if today all jurors know what DNA is and that it's practically a 100% guarantee that the accused is the real killer, in those years, DNA was new, just like a smeared fingerprint. The prosecutor was afraid that Jeffrey would be acquitted. At that time in Ohio, there was also no life sentence without the possibility of parole, as there is today. Therefore, he was sentenced to a term of 33 years to life, but considering the time he had already served in prison and his exemplary behavior, his first parole hearing was held on September 21, 2021. Melissa's family, her friends, and other people associated with the case, including Anna Collin, wrote letters to the parole board objecting to his release. About 400 letters were sent in total. When Jeffrey killed Melissa, he was only 22 years old. He was still relatively young and could commit more crimes if released. Furthermore, over the years, he never once contacted Melissa's family, never apologized, never attempted to explain what happened that night. Of course, his release was denied, and the next hearing will take place in 2031. The victim's family sued the university because the university administration hired Jeffrey and overlooked the numerous offenses he committed. The university paid the family $1 million, but it didn't make things easier for them. They never heard from Jeffrey Hodgson what Melissa did to deserve such a fate. Although more than 30 years have passed, Melissa's university friends have not forgotten about her. A few years ago, they raised funds to create a cozy relaxation area at the university, where students can sit, relax, and remember Melissa, who once also studied at the University of Toledo, dreaming of becoming a nurse. But this was not allowed for her by a 22-year-old policeman with too high an opinion of himself, dreaming of becoming a hero, and instead of that, killing a girl whom he pledged to protect.
Sometimes, these seemingly inconspicuous clues are endowed with immense power. Presented together, they can recreate the crime scene, narrate the story of what happened, and deliver the culprit into the hands of justice. But if hidden, they can serve evil, slander, fuel harassment, or take someone's life. Fort Collins, Colorado, February 11, 1987. Around 7 in the morning, a frightened bicyclist called the police to report something suspicious in the middle of a field. He initially thought it was a mannequin, but given his location and posture, decided it was worth the police's attention. The arriving officers soon confirmed a much more gruesome reality. The mysterious figure turned out to be the partially unclothed body of 37-year-old local resident Peggy Hettrick. Peggy had clearly been dragged to the spot where she was found, as there was a long trail of blood leading from the road. Her face bore scratches, as if someone had held her at knife point. The knife also became the murder weapon. Peggy suffered a precise strike from behind, severing a major artery, leading to her rapid blood loss. Blood was found on the sidewalk, but it's unclear whether she was attacked on the road or pulled from a vehicle and then moved to the field. The perpetrator removed a portion of the woman's chest. Subsequent autopsy revealed that Peggy had undergone female genital mutilation, a fact that horrified the investigators. Murders involving this kind of post-mortem mutilation make up less than 1% of all cases, making it an extremely rare occurrence for any police department, especially in a small town. In their haste to solve the case, the police compiled an initial list of suspects, with Peggy's on and off boyfriend, Matt Zollner, taking the top spot. According to accounts from the victim's family and friends, Matt was inclined to end the relationship for good, while Peggy was not ready for that. Matt was one of the last people to see her alive. She encountered the man in a bar parking lot, where she went after work. She was visibly upset to find him in the company of another woman, and they had an argument. Nevertheless, Matt offered to give Peggy a ride home, but she declined and left the establishment on her own. There was no direct evidence linking him to the murder, and he had an alibi, albeit not the most solid one. His girlfriend claimed that he had spent the entire night with her. Who else could have had a motive for the murder? Investigators also took note of the location where the body was found. Peggy was dragged across the field perpendicular to the road before being turned. There were more discreet places to conceal the body, so why did the perpetrator choose to leave Peggy in such a conspicuous spot? Was it to watch from the window of their home? Several houses were directly across the field, with the closest one belonging to widower Clyde Masters. His wife had passed away 4 years earlier when their son, Timothy Lee Tim Masters, was just 11 years old. Clyde recounted that on the morning of the incident, he woke up his son as usual, prepared breakfast, and saw him walk out the back door toward the school bus. Normally, Tim would quickly cross the field to cut his route short, but on that day, he hesitated for a few seconds. Detective Linda Wheeler Holloway realized that Tim must have seen the body but did not report it. Suddenly, the quiet, introverted 15-year-old boy became the prime suspect in the case. The teenager was taken out of school for questioning. He explained that as he walked across the field, he initially thought he had seen someone had discarded trash in the distance. As he got closer, he thought it might be a first aid dummy, perhaps a foolish prank. The figure had exposed parts, with hair pulled back, and it could easily be mistaken for a woman's body. Tim admitted that, while on the bus, he had some doubts about whether it might be a real body. Nevertheless, he did not report it. The cyclist who alerted the police also initially thought it might be a mannequin, but for some reason, the police believed him and not Tim. The boy was sent home, but the next day, he was invited to the police station for questioning. The police officers requested to speak to Tim without his father present, and they interrogated the teenager for 10 hours. At the same time, Detective Jim Broderick searched the Masters' home. On Tim's bedroom closet, he found a collection of knives. Of course, they were confiscated. What raised more suspicion were Tim's drawings. Numerous sketches depicted scenes of violence to varying degrees. These findings convinced the detectives that they were dealing with a killer. They put immense pressure on the boy, using various interrogation techniques, but he never wavered and did not confess to anything except not reporting the body. He remained consistent in his story and did not lose his temper. Tim explained that he collected cheap knives, influenced by the popular character Rambo from the 1980s. Upon learning that someone had been murdered right across from his home, he got scared and, after the school questioning, placed the knives on his closet for self-defense. As for the drawings, it was a way to gain attention from his classmates, and the more they praised his work, the more he enjoyed creating them. Detectives were divided in their opinions. The professionals who interrogated the boy were convinced that he was not the murderer. They released him. However, the police did not leave him in peace. They spoke to his teachers and classmates, openly informing them that Tim was a suspect. Nearly all of Tim's friends turned their backs on him. The police investigated all the knives, clothing, and even the home's sewage system, but they found not a drop of blood that would connect Tim to Peggy. The investigation came to a standstill. Weeks and months passed, but the case remained stagnant. As Peggy was killed almost exactly 4 years after Tim's mother died, the police believed that he committed the murder out of anger over losing his mother. Therefore, a year after Peggy's murder, they began surveilling him. They also kept an eye on his house and even Peggy's grave, hoping that he would visit there. However, all they found out during that week was that Tim woke up early in the morning, went to school, played video games after school, did his homework, and went to bed. So the police convinced a local newspaper reporter to write a story about an imminent arrest. The final straw in the harassment of the teenager was a copy of his mother's obituary, which the detectives left on the windshield of his friend's car. Despite all of this, Tim continued to live his life, believing that soon everyone would realize it was a big mistake. Unfortunately, he didn't account for one very persistent police officer. 4 years later, at the Fort Collins police station, there was renewed interest in old cases. Linda reviewed the materials of Peggy's murder once again and noticed a crucial detail that the police had missed before. She learned from Tim's friend that he knew Peggy had a part of her breast severed or bitten off. The police had kept this fact secret, so Linda believed she had grounds for an arrest. In July 1992, Linda located the now 20-year-old Tim in Philadelphia, where he was serving in the Navy. The young man had received a promotion, was living his life, and was confident that he had left that story behind. He calmly told Linda that the big secret of the police was never a secret to anyone, because officers had involved Boy Scouts in searching the field, telling them they were looking for a part of a woman's breast. One of the Girl Scouts involved in the search went to school with Tim, sat next to him in class, and told him about it. When she confirmed this, Linda realized that the young man was most likely innocent. She wanted to restart the investigation from scratch and seek FBI assistance, but she was prohibited from contacting the Bureau. Linda closed the case in 1993 and left the Fort Collins Police Department 2 years later. When she left, Jim Broderick warned her that he would reopen Peggy's case, focusing on his favorite suspect once again. On August 10, 1998, Tim Masters woke up to a knock on the door. He didn't recognize Broderick when he announced that Tim was under arrest. The police had absolutely no new evidence. No DNA, no hairs, no fingerprints, no confessions to a fellow service member, nothing. Nonetheless, in February 1999, the man stood before a judge. Even the prosecutors were convinced that they couldn't prove Tim's guilt, but Broderick convinced them otherwise. They built the entire case on the teenager's drawings and invited psychologist Reed Malloy to analyze them. The expert never met Tim in person, but claimed that out of all possible suspects, Tim had to be the killer. 2 of the boy's drawings particularly interested him. In one, a person drags another by the armpits, and in the other, a knife appears to penetrate something. Tim explained that he drew one of them after he saw the body. The other had nothing to do with stabbing a person, but was more of an attempt to create a 3D image of a knife going through paper. However, Malloy pressured the jury with his expert opinion, showing them the drawings and assuring them that Tim was capable of violence. The prosecutors reinforced this by telling the jury that no one else had a motive, opportunity, or weapon. Tim's changed appearance worked in their favor. The jurors didn't see the skinny, frail teenager who could hardly drag a woman's body across a field. They saw a sturdy man. In the end, even though there was not a single piece of physical evidence against the defendant, on March 26, 1999, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The wrongful conviction of Tim Masters weighed heavily on Detective Linda. She couldn't shake the thought that an innocent person was in prison and she didn't know what to do. She decided to review the case materials and was horrified to find that many crucial pieces of evidence were missing. When she asked why he hadn't turned over all the evidence to the prosecutors, Jim Broderick responded that it was up to him to decide what to give them. He focused extensively on the shoe prints found at the scene, even though Tim had admitted to walking through the field. However, he ignored other tracks, particularly the footprints of Tom McCann, leading away from the body. These were adult-sized shoes, not the kind worn by teenagers, and they were never presented in court. There were other facts deliberately concealed from the court, including expert opinions suggesting Tim's innocence. First, there was Broderick's interview with an FBI profiler who questioned the significance of Tim's drawings. The profiler believed they were just typical teenage comics unrelated to Peggy's murder. Second, the removal of part of Peggy's breast and the female circumcision were 2 surgical procedures that required expertise. It was hard to imagine a 15-year-old teenager with no surgical experience performing these operations in the middle of a field with only a flashlight or a lighter. Among the concealed evidence was also a perfect alternative suspect in Peggy's murder. The revelation about Dr. Richard Hammond's voyeurism activities added a new layer of complexity to the case. In 1995, he was arrested when a student he had hired to watch his house discovered hidden cameras in the guest bathroom. Dr. Hammond had placed several cameras that would activate when the light in the room was turned on. These cameras were pointed at the most intimate parts of a woman's body. To identify who was caught on video, he set up a roll of paper so that the camera would capture the face of the person reaching for it. The film rolls were continuously replaced, and even when Dr. Hammond was out of town, he didn't miss anything. He collected secret video collections of his daughter's school friends, family friends, relatives, and visitors over the course of months. One of the detectives conducting a search in Hammond's house called Jim Broderick and informed him about a possible connection to Peggy's case, but Broderick paid no attention to it and even refused to examine the evidence. And there was plenty to examine. Dr. Hammond lived right across from the field where Peggy was found, and this location was visible from his house. He wore Tom McCann shoes. He was a surgeon, which meant he could have performed surgery on the victim's body. Lastly, he was a voyeur, fixated on the most intimate parts of the female body, right across from the house where a murdered woman was discovered, missing precisely those parts. However, Broderick dismissed this lead and didn't even want to review the evidence. However, if Peggy appeared on Hammond's tapes, no one would ever know. Dr. Hammond was arrested, spent a few days in a psychiatric facility, and was released on bail. He immediately went to a hotel in Denver and injected himself with cyanide. Within 5 months of Hammond's death, all the tapes were destroyed. What's crucial is that during Tim's trial, neither the defense nor the prosecutors knew about this, and they built the case on the assumption that no one else could have committed the murder. Tim Masters' legal team, armed with new information and conducting their experiments, presented their version of what could have happened on that day. According to their theory, Peggy was abducted in her car with a knife held to her cheek as she exited the bar. She was then forced into the car, but she didn't give in to fear. She opened the door and attempted to jump out of the moving vehicle, which would explain the scuffs on the sole of her right shoe when she pulled her foot from the moving car. Furthermore, the knife wound holes on Peggy's body, blouse, and coat align only when you twist them as if someone were pulling her into a car. Perhaps after this, the killers took Peggy to a well-lit location where they could perform surgeries on the most delicate parts of her body. Then they transported her to the field. Importantly, there were no marks on the ground from dragging the body, and there was no dirt or grass on Peggy's clothing. According to experiments conducted by the defense, this scenario could only have occurred if 2 people were involved. If everything happened as the defense believes, Tim's drawing, which was a key piece of evidence in his first trial, doesn't appear as compelling. But despite the huge number of hidden evidences from the court, Tim's defenders were not sure if this would be sufficient to overturn the guilty verdict. That's why they turned their attention to DNA. They were willing to go to great lengths and take risks to uncover the truth. Linda reached out to experts from the Netherlands who used the most advanced DNA detection methods at the crime scene. They were particularly interested in skin cells that remain on clothing when someone applies force to tear or pull it from another person. They found several samples of unknown male DNA on her clothing, but what intrigued them even more were the skin cells on the inside of her underwear and on the cuffs of Peggy's blouse. In these locations, DNA cannot accidentally end up, and whoever it belonged to needed to provide some explanations. Was it Tim Masters' DNA? No. Dr. Hammond's? No, it turned out to be the DNA of Matt Zollner, Peggy's ex-boyfriend, the last person who had seen her alive and had an argument with her on the evening of the murder. Discovering all of this evidence, Tim's defenders had no doubt that they would be allowed to hold a new trial for Tim. However, the prosecutor took an unexpected and bold step, requesting the court to immediately release Tim without a trial. Tim was released on January 22, 2008. His charges were dropped, although officially he is still considered a suspect in Peggy's murder. Matt Zollner was never charged in connection with the murder. He continues to lead a relatively calm life in Fort Collins. Jim Broderick was charged with perjury in 2010, and in 2013, all charges against him were dropped. Prosecutors in Tim's trial were reprimanded and fined for not disclosing all the available information to the defense, although they were later promoted to judges. Tim spent almost 10 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. It's not surprising that he now highly values outdoor walks and admits that he's afraid to fully enjoy life because he deeply fears losing it again. Tom Hettrick, Peggy's brother, who had long doubted that Tim was the killer, received the news of his release with joy. However, he wants everyone to understand that not everything is over. Peggy is the real victim in this story. Tim has returned home, but Peggy never will. Her family and friends never found out who took their intelligent, trusting, charmingly eccentric, and very independent daughter, sister, and friend. The murder that shocked the town over 20 years ago remains as much of a mystery today as it was then. The question remains open today: who killed Peggy Hettrick? Was it Matt Zollner, Richard Hammond, or someone who never came to the attention of the police, but was in the right place at the right time? Perhaps Peggy simply crossed paths with a stranger who noticed her and decided she would be his victim. Several years before the John Benet Ramsey case, America was trying to solve the mystery of the disappearance of 7-year-old Jaclyn Dowaliby. Was she abducted by a stranger who entered her home under the cover of night? Or did she become a victim within her own family? The police were convinced that the culprits were always in plain sight, whereas no one who knew the family doubted their complete innocence. Midlothian, located in the state of Illinois, USA, is a small town where everyone knows each other. It is situated approximately 30 minutes south of the bustling streets of Chicago and is considered a quiet suburb where there is always a sense of being in a familiar place. However, in 1988, the town changed forever when 7-year-old Jaclyn Dowaliby disappeared from her own bedroom in the middle of the night. Jaclyn lived in a cozy ranch-style home with her parents, David and Cynthia, and her 4-year-old brother, Davy. The family resided in a beautiful location, surrounded by several nature preserves, all within walking distance from their home. Jaclyn's biological father, Jimmy Guess, had no involvement in her life after a bitter divorce from Cynthia shortly after their daughter was born. David Dowaliby adopted Jaclyn when he married Cynthia 5 years ago when Jaclyn was 2 years old, and he was the only father she knew. Cynthia worked as a dietitian at the local hospital, and David was a carpenter who had been promoted to a foreman. David and Jaclyn had an instant connection, often going fishing and bowling together. According to one neighbor, whose daughter was friends with Jaclyn, she was a happy little girl who never showed any signs of sadness or anger. According to all accounts, the Dowalibys were a typical, close-knit suburban family. On the evening of September 10, 1988, Cynthia took Jaclyn and Davy to a nearby KFC Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant, while David met up with his friends and went bowling. When all family members returned home, they watched television, and Jaclyn, wearing her favorite purple and white pajamas, kissed Cynthia and David goodnight. What exactly happened in the house that night remains unclear, but the next morning, the little brunette with brown eyes was no longer there. David and his son woke up earlier than the other family members on the next morning, and around 7:45, David noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. At first, he thought that his mother, who lived with the family, had left it open and didn't worry much about it. He prepared breakfast for Davy and turned on the television. A little later, Cynthia woke up and went to wake up their daughter but couldn't find Jaclyn in her bedroom. The parents called Jaclyn's friends, thinking that she might have gone outside to play. While they searched for the child inside the house and in the neighborhood, Cynthia noticed that the basement window was broken and wide open. David immediately called the police and reported his daughter's disappearance. After investigators arrived at the house, Cynthia and David explained that none of them had heard anything unusual during the night, and they had all been sound asleep. Nothing was missing from the house except Jaclyn's blanket, which matched the colors of her pajamas. Furthermore, there were no signs of a struggle. Investigators needed to determine whether someone had broken into the house and taken Jaclyn, or if she had left the house herself, only to be taken by someone else. Although there were no phone calls or ransom notes, the FBI agents took over the investigation, presuming that they were dealing with a kidnapping rather than a runaway case. Soon, the news of a possible abduction spread throughout the town. The suburb mainly consisted of families with young children, and the possibility that someone had broken into a family's home and abducted their little girl in the middle of the night while everyone was asleep was a horrifying revelation. Considering that there were no signs of a struggle, investigators began to wonder if the girl might have left with someone she knew. If the intruder had entered the house through the broken basement window, they needed to be familiar with the layout of the house to enter the girl's room without waking the other family members, investigators concluded. We are looking at it with an open mind as a potential abduction, but also as an abduction with someone known to the family, said Police Captain John Bitton. This statement led Cynthia to recall an unsettling incident that occurred several years earlier. After a bitter custody battle during which her former partner, Jimmy Guess, did everything in his power to keep their daughter with him, he had broken into their home and attempted to take their daughter. Therefore, Cynthia suspected his involvement in Jaclyn's disappearance because she knew he was capable of such actions. Jaclyn's grandmother, Anne Dowaliby, admits that she wasn't initially worried about her granddaughter's safety because she believed that Jaclyn had been taken by her biological father, and she was confident they would quickly get her back. However, she couldn't have known that Jimmy had been in prison in Florida for the previous 4 months during Jaclyn's disappearance and was soon ruled out as a suspect. Suspicion also fell on Jaclyn's uncle, Timothy Guess, who lived nearby and suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. However, he had an alibi. It was at this point that Cynthia began to worry that something bad had happened to her daughter. The parents of the girl, Cynthia and David, were questioned multiple times in the following days. They didn't hide anything. They explained that Jaclyn had gone to bed at 10 p.m., and when Cynthia went to check on her at 11 p.m., she was sound asleep. The police became increasingly skeptical of the parents' story. It was difficult for them to believe that a person unfamiliar with the layout of the house could have crawled through the basement window without disturbing the towel dryer right beneath the window. Then, they would have had to walk down the hallway to the girl's room and take her away without waking any of the other family members. The only sign that a stranger had been in the house was the broken window. No fingerprints or signs of a struggle were found. Indeed, when it comes to fingerprints and other evidence, it's important to note that the police themselves made a series of mistakes that could have influenced their conclusions. They never secured the girl's room to prevent anyone from entering it, and they didn't thoroughly search the house. A forensic expert took photographs, but he didn't even bother to take close-up pictures of the broken window. He checked the window and the front door for fingerprints, but not the back door. What was even more astonishing was that the police allowed friends of the family to clean up their house and even sweep away the glass from the broken window. The police just stood by and watched as they cleaned up, destroying any evidence that the kidnapper might have left behind. Immediately after the girl's disappearance, Jaclyn's parents were asked to take a polygraph test. Cynthia was too distraught for such a test. Friends recall that she was in a terrible state, constantly feeling nauseous. David underwent the polygraph test, which he passed. But in the minds of the police, everything seemed to point to the parents. The number of potential suspects sharply narrowed after one of the forensic experts stated that, in his opinion, the basement window had been broken from the inside. On September 14th, 5 days after the girl's disappearance, the parents attempted to take a polygraph test again. Cynthia's results were inconclusive due to her emotional state. David's results were also inconclusive, and the polygraph examiner accused him of not cooperating with the investigation. David, in turn, claimed that the polygraph examiner instructed him to answer yes to all questions, including the question, "Did you kill your daughter?" to which David refused to answer yes. Afterward, David was taken into an interrogation room and was not released for 5 hours. Later that evening, Michael Chapman pulled into the parking lot of the Islander Apartments on 1912 Canal Street in Blue Island, a town located about 5 kilometers from the girl's home. When Chapman exited his car, he noticed an unpleasant odor in the fresh autumn air. He spotted something wrapped up in the grass, which he described as a wrapped-up object. As he approached, he saw a head and a hand, and he immediately ran inside to call the police. Jaclyn's body was discovered, and she was still bound with a 2-meter rope, which was considered evidence of the crime. Her soiled underwear was found about 60 centimeters from her body. As for the police, they continued to question Jaclyn's father for about 1.5 hours without informing him that his daughter had been found. They tried to convince him to confess to the crime. When Officer Kevin Shaughnessy finally told him about Jaclyn's discovery, David didn't believe him, thinking it was another police trick to make him confess. This is likely why he responded with the phrase, "I guess you think I should cry now?" However, Officer Shaughnessy interpreted these words differently, and they convinced him not to pursue other suspects. In any case, there was no evidence against David, and he was released to go home, where he found his distraught wife and realized that his daughter was truly gone. By morning, with the help of dental records, the body was officially identified as Jaclyn Dowaliby. Initially, based solely on the appearance of the body, there was speculation that she had been struck on the head, but the Cook County coroner, Dr. Robert Stein, stated that the condition of the body was the result of rapid decomposition due to the unusually warm September weather. Dr. Stein could not determine with certainty whether the girl had been sexually assaulted or not due to the state of decomposition. Although the exact time of death couldn't be determined either, Robert Stein concluded that she had been dead for several days, and the terrible crime was most likely committed early Saturday morning, right after her disappearance. After the body was identified, and given that they had been individually questioned for hours before Jaclyn was found, both Cynthia and David hired lawyers who advised them to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights and not answer any more questions from investigators. They had already told the police everything they knew, provided blood and urine samples, and gave permission for investigators to examine any family medical records that might be relevant. They also allowed investigators access to their home for all 5 days that Jaclyn was missing. The Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution allows citizens to refuse to answer any questions that may incriminate them. The Dowalibys had every right to invoke the Fifth Amendment. However, with no other suspects, law enforcement focused their attention on Cynthia and David as the primary suspects and claimed that it was suspicious that they were not cooperating with investigators. Police rushed to accuse the family of refusing to cooperate with the investigation. Prosecutor Patrick O'Brien explained, "Even if you are being looked at as a suspect, and you know deep down inside that you didn't do this, and it's unfair, the idea of not cooperating with the police that are investigating the murder of your daughter seems overly concerned about your personal interests." On the day after the funeral, a team of 20 police officers executed search warrants at the Dowaliby home. They emerged from the house with several large bags containing items they wanted to examine in the laboratory. Additionally, they confiscated the family's blue Chevrolet Malibu. Months passed, but there were no updates or new information about the case. However, the police made a statement indicating that the family members had not been excluded as suspects. Cynthia's lawyer, Lawrence Hyman, criticized the police investigation, calling it a blatant violation of the law. While Cynthia and David continued to avoid communicating with the media, they had a multitude of supporters. Neighbors stood by the family, telling journalists that the Dowalibys were a loving and caring family, and they had never heard either of the parents raise their voice at Jaclyn or Davy. David's boss, Ross Patterson, recalled, "The only time David took a day off work was when he needed to get documents for Jaclyn's adoption." However, this did not convince the investigators. Adhering to the theory that Cynthia and David could be involved in the crime, they returned to the location where the body was found and began showing photos of Cynthia, David, and their car to residents of the Islander apartments, hoping to find any witnesses who might have seen them in the area. On November 22nd, Cynthia and David were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Their son Davy was placed under the care of the Department of Family and Children's Services. It became known that a tenant of the apartment complex where the body was found had told investigators that he had seen David in a blue Chevy Malibu in the parking lot. A witness, a 35-year-old city transportation worker named Everett Mann, said that around 2 a.m. on September 10th, he was pulling into the parking lot, and his headlights illuminated a blue Chevy with a driver he claimed was David Dowaliby. During Cynthia and David's arrest, they were deliberately paraded in front of the media so that as many photos as possible could be taken, seemingly to convey the message, "Look, we've done our job." Detectives boasted about having a wealth of evidence against David and Cynthia, including 2 witnesses. However, it remained unclear why loving parents would act this way towards their daughter. Were there enough pieces of evidence? Or were the investigators rushing to take the case to court for some reason? Perhaps the answer to this question lies in the fact that on the same day as the parents' arrest, a major news story emerged. Richard M. Daley, the state's chief prosecutor whose office was handling the case, announced his candidacy for mayor of Chicago. Critics accused him of using a high-profile crime in his political game, but despite the criticism, Daley became the mayor of Chicago, and the case was handed over to the court. It is widely known that eyewitness testimonies are highly unreliable. Nevertheless, the witness statements suggesting that David was near the crime scene were enough to charge him and his wife with first-degree murder. Blue Island Police Chief Paul Greaves referred to these witness testimonies as excellent evidence that allowed them to rule out other leads. The police never disclosed what those other leads were, but relying solely on witness testimony to exclude all other possibilities seemed somewhat prejudicial, especially considering that Cynthia was not linked to the crime scene. Both spouses were denied bail, and it was revealed that Cynthia was in the early stages of pregnancy. In the search for new evidence, the police decided to focus on the couple's 5-year-old son, Davy, who was examined by a doctor. Supposedly, the doctor found traces on his body that could have resulted from a belt, some of which were old while others were recent. The police suspected that Cynthia and David had abused Davy at home, suggesting it could be a motive for the crime. Patrick Murphy, Davy's state-appointed guardian, said that the police and prosecutors continuously questioned the child for 4 days. He added that after speaking with Davy and reviewing his medical records, he couldn't understand how they arrived at such a conclusion because he couldn't find anything that indicated violence against the child. He also mentioned that Davy constantly pleaded to see his parents, and he missed them greatly. In mid-December, Cynthia and David were released on bail, but Davy was not allowed to return home with his parents. He was placed in the custody of David's sister Rose and her husband John. Davy was only allowed to see his parents during supervised visits. In April 1990, the court proceedings began. It became clear early on that the evidence gathered by law enforcement was not as compelling as initially reported. The prosecutors didn't even have a clear motive for the crime, but fortunately for them, they were not legally obligated to provide one. Their main argument was straightforward. There were no outsiders in the house, so the Dowalibys must be guilty. The defense argued that due to the poor police work, it was impossible to determine how the intruder had entered the house and what had transpired inside during that night. The idea that the intruder needed to know the layout of the house to find Jaclyn's bedroom seemed far-fetched. The family lived in a typical ranch-style house. Many such houses are built with a similar layout. Anyone who had ever been inside a similar house would likely know the layout. The prosecutors also tried to argue that the intruder had to navigate through a window without disturbing objects below, such as a vanity, a TV stand, and a towel rack. To demonstrate that this was possible, David filmed a video showing how a neighbor climbed through the basement window, propped his leg on the wall, and didn't disturb any objects below. Furthermore, it turned out that the prosecution had only one witness, not two. Everett Mann, the key prosecution witness, admitted during the trial that he had identified David solely by his prominent nose. He was about 70 meters away from the man in the parking lot and only remembered his distinctive nose, as it was dark and the lighting was quite dim. Moreover, during the photo identification, Everett was shown a frontal picture of David, while he had only seen the person in profile. Additionally, David's photo was much larger than the 4 photos of other men. Everett admitted that the person he saw that night could have been African American or Caucasian, or even a man or a woman, and all he saw was a silhouette that only looked male. In a night without moonlight, 3 weeks into the trial, the jury members were taken to the same parking lot where Everett had supposedly seen David. They stood in the same spot under similar conditions as Everett. They could hardly see anything. In reality, they couldn't even notice a nearby garbage can, which was said to be near where the car was parked. Several neighbors of the Dowalibys also contradicted the witness's account regarding the car. The defense lawyers built their case around the fact that a remarkably similar crime occurred in the same neighborhood about a year after Jaclyn's abduction. On September 2, 1989, Perry Hernandez broke into a home in Blue Island and kidnapped a 6-year-old girl while her family slept. He entered by breaking a window and made his way inside without waking anyone. The man took the girl to a railroad bridge near the Calumet River, tormented her, and then allowed her to return home. This happened within 1.5 miles of where Jaclyn was found. An interesting detail emerged. The girl Hernandez was living with at the time also owned a Chevy Malibu, and Perry often stayed overnight at her apartment. In fact, even on the night before Jaclyn's disappearance, someone had entered another home in Midlothian. Elizabeth Siki woke up in the middle of the night and thwarted an attempted robbery or abduction of her daughter. She identified the person she saw in her home that night as Perry Hernandez and expressed confidence that he intended to abduct her 7-year-old daughter, whom she found tightly wrapped in 3 towels, as if someone had intended to take her away. While this may seem like more than a coincidence, Judge Richard Neville stated that he did not consider this evidence and prohibited Cynthia and David's defense from presenting these facts in court. However, the little girl abducted by Perry Hernandez was invited to testify. She recalled that while she was with the kidnapper under the bridge, he held a rope, as if threatening her with it. Besides the striking similarities between the 2 cases, this demonstrated that a small child could indeed be taken from a bedroom without waking anyone. However, in court, the defense made a mistake by failing to establish a connection with the jury members. They wanted David to take the witness stand and firmly declare his innocence, looking them in the eye, but that didn't happen. The most significant obstacle for the defense turned out to be the 17 autopsy photographs and remains presented to the jury. The prosecutors claimed that the photos were meant to help determine the time and cause of death. The defense believed that these photos simply contributed to bias among the jury members. An attorney explains, "You're shown a beautiful girl next to a photograph of her body. And of course, the jury members thought someone must pay for this crime." However, the photos didn't convince the judge, who dropped the charges against Cynthia because her only connection to the crime was being in the house. The judge ordered to keep his decision secret because David's fate still lay in the hands of the jury due to the testimony of Everett Mann. After 14 hours, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty. Everyone believed that David would be acquitted, and the media were already waiting for him outside the courthouse for interviews. It was a shock to everyone that he was found guilty. The judge sentenced David to 45 years in prison. Many didn't understand why the jury had no doubts about his guilt, but suddenly everything fell into place. In an interview with a reporter, the jury foreperson confessed why a guilty verdict was reached. It turns out that the jury saw photographs of the Dowaliby home. In one photo, the bedroom door of young Davy showed a dent from a fist, and the jurors believed this indicated David Dowaliby's violent nature. Coming to this conclusion, the jury members decided that there had been a lot of violence in the house. How wrong they were. The fist-sized dent had appeared long before David moved into the house with Cynthia, and perhaps even before Jaclyn's birth. David's younger brother had struck the door with his fist when he was a teenager. The house belonged to David's mother, and the family always had more important things to spend money on, and the door was never replaced. Neither the defense nor the prosecution mentioned this dent, so the jury's decision was based on things that were not even discussed in court. The jury foreperson added that if they had their way, they would have accused Cynthia as well. During this time, Cynthia fought for custody of Davy. Several psychologists and social workers testified, stating that there was no hint that Davy had ever been mistreated, and Cynthia was a kind and loving mother who doted on Davy, and he on her. By mid-July, Davy was allowed to return home to his mother and his recently born sister, Carly Marie. The fact that the jury was biased against David needed to be used to challenge the verdict. Cynthia and the family's friends formed a committee to fight for David's release. One committee member offered a $10,000 reward for any information about the crime. Additionally, the committee allowed them to connect with people who could assist with the case. One of those people turned out to be Robert Byman, an attorney from the Chicago law firm Jenner and Block, who volunteered to work on the case pro bono. Initially, due to police statements, he also believed in David's guilt, but after studying the case materials, he realized there was no evidence against him at all. He understood that David was wrongly accused due to human nature. Byman explained, 12 good and decent members of the jury were entrusted with deciding the fate of this case. Their choice was simple: to stand up and leave, saying, "Sorry, Jaclyn, we can't do anything for you," or to convict the only person sitting before them. They chose the latter. In October, Robert Byman filed a petition for David's release based on new evidence. Gerald Bauman, a prisoner at Cook County Jail, claimed that he had overheard Perry Hernandez confess to the murder. However, after the petition was filed, Gerald refused to sign his previously given sworn statements, fearing for his safety, and claimed that he had received threats after news of this new evidence came to light. The appeal garnered such a significant response that, for the first time, the Illinois Appellate Court allowed video recording of the case proceedings. The Illinois Appellate Court had three options: uphold the guilty verdict, order a new trial, or completely exonerate David, which would mean he could never be tried for this case again. 5 months later, the court's decision was announced: complete exoneration. The court ruled that the chief witness's testimony had been inaccurate and unreliable, and the prosecutors had failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that David was the only person with the opportunity to commit the crime. The judges noted that all the basement windows had been left unlocked that night, and any of them could have allowed the perpetrator inside, but unfortunately they were not checked for fingerprints. They also criticized the decision to show the jury 17 gruesome body photographs that were unnecessary. On November 13, 1991, after spending 18 months in prison, David walked free. "I've been a lawyer for almost 30 years, And in all that time, there have only been 3 times when I was as happy as I was the day I walked David Dowaliby out of prison. Our judicial system is designed to work in 95% of cases. This time the system failed. It convicted an innocent man, said Robert Byman. However, the Dowaliby family was about to experience yet another shocking turn of events in one of the most paradoxical and unusual murder sagas in modern Chicago history. It became known that Rob Warden and David Protess, who were writing a book about the case titled Gone in the Night, had discovered a new potential suspect. Timothy Guess was a 31-year-old brother of Jaclyn's biological father. Timothy had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and lived in a house with his mother not far from Jaclyn's home. Initially, he claimed to have been working at the Park Avenue restaurant in Harvey on the night of the murder, and 3 restaurant employees confirmed his alibi. However, now 2 of them had recanted their statements. At least 5 regulars of the establishment also claimed that Timothy wasn't there that night. Warden and Protess spoke to Timothy, who told them that he often heard voices in his head and suffered from memory lapses. He told them that he was guided by a spirit, and this spirit had allowed him to describe the layout of the Dowaliby house, even though he had never been inside. He could even describe how to get to Jaclyn's bedroom. Timothy described the blanket in which the body was wrapped, and somehow knew that the light in the bedroom was off on the night of her disappearance. However, Timothy was never seriously considered a suspect even after this information came to light. He passed away in 2002. Protess said, "I felt that the case was solved, but I never thought anyone would be held accountable for the crime. The state would be too embarrassed to admit they had wrongly accused Cynthia and David." Since then, the Dowaliby family has moved and changed their last name due to the excessive attention on their lives. They still hope that Jaclyn's murder will be solved. Something terrible happened in that ranch-style home in Midlothian, Illinois, on the night of September 9, 1988. But 3 decades later, there are still no answers as to what exactly transpired. While the local police claim the case is open, there are evidently no leads being pursued. Every U.S. citizen has the right to invoke the Fifth Amendment, but when Cynthia and David exercised that right, they found themselves at the center of a wrongly and negligently conducted investigation.